Hello everyone, we are Wojciech and Leonie, Erasmus students, and Rania, who are currently studying at the University of Pablo de Olavide in Sevilla, Spain. This project is podcast authors lecture introduction to sociology. The coordinator and lecturer is Dr. Maria José del Pino Espero. We present Beatrice Potter-Webb and Karl Mannheim. Firstly, we are talking about the life and the sociological contribution of Beatrice Potter-Webb. And secondly, we focus on Karl Mannheim. Now, we focus on the sociological work of Beatrice Potter-Webb. The main theme of her sociological work is the poverty. What led her to look into this topic is to questioning the persistence of poor people despite a context combined of progress and improvement that she called the mid-Victorian time spirit, meaning the improvement of the living condition of the population thanks to technological progress characteristic of the 19th century. She began her first experience in social investigation working on charity. She worked with Charles, her cousin-in-law, also a British precursor of sociology, who was writing The Life and Labour of the People of London, published in 1889. Joined to both, she denounced the capital system, which was slowly destroying the British working class. At the end of her work on parts of both study, she returned to the subject of working the cooperative movement. In her 1891 book, The Cooperative Movement in Great Britain, she distinguished between the cooperative federalism and cooperative individualism. She identified herself as a cooperative federalist, a school of thought which advocates consumer cooperative societies. What produced a clear break with a philosophical education led by Herbert Spencer. In fact, Beatrice grew up in an individualistic and liberal society where the state should not intervene in the social and economic spheres of society. The Spencer ideology was meritocracy. That means that each person's living conditions were intrinsically linked to his or her strength of will. So if someone was in misery, it was because he or she had not worked enough, but sociological factors of poverty were not emphasized. This perspective had repercussions of making the poor feel guilty and facilitating the wealthy classes. So from an individualistic interpretation of social organization, Beatrice Potter-Webb passed to a collectivist interpretation. She wanted to show that Spencer theories weren't scientific theories. For her, the individual is shaped by social organization that explains the causes of destitution amidst prosperity. To come back about the cooperative movement, Beatrice Potter-Webb argued that consumer cooperatives should be set up as cooperative wholesale societies, a form of federal cooperative society through which consumers' cooperatives can collectively purchase goods at wholesale prices. Webb's empirical researches show her that the causes of poverty are not individual character but in social structure. The cause is in the failure of people to act collectively to control competition and capitalism and to produce an equitable distribution of goods and services. So, the cause is in the source of capitalism and wealth. She is a founder of social policies. In 1998, she declared to be interested in the general problem of how to use facts to generate policy-relevant theory. From 1905 until 1909, She was a member of the Royal Commission on the Poor Laws. At this time, the Britannic government, with a majority of conservative politicians, established the commission to investigate how the poor law system should be changed. Beatrice was the lead author of one of the two reports published by the Commission, the Minority Report. It was among the most famous of the Webb's outputs, and Beatrice Potter Webb wrote that its purpose was to secure a national minimum of civilized life, open to all alike, of both sexes and all classes, by which we meant sufficient nourishment and training when young, a living wage work when able-bodied, treatment when sick, and modest but secure livelihood when disabled or aged. William Beveridge, future author of the 1942 Beveridge Report that introduced the welfare state in the UK, worked as the researcher of the Webb's on the Minority Report. In this sense, we can say that Beatrice Potter Webb's contribute to the ideological beginnings of the welfare state. In the continuity of the importance she gave to politics to reform society, she co-founded with her husband Sidney the London School of Economics. In 1894, with the initial intention of renewing the training of Britain's political and business elite, it is a multidisciplinary training mixing social sciences, geography, philosophy, international relations, history, law, psychology, and sociology. London School of Economy redefines the study of economics and has to be looked at as the father of modern economics studies that focuses on human reaction to changes in the economic environment. As said before, she concludes that the individualism of Spencer, who was a paternal figure, was false, was only ideological, not scientific. Social structures are created according to the individualist situation. They are poor people not because they don't want to work, but because it exists all social structures and institutions which condemn some people to be poor. She talked about the state, but also other like the capitalist economic model. During her work on cooperative movement, she became a socialist reformist in the 90s. She promoted a world without free competition and in which one a minimum standard of quality of life was guaranteed to each individual member of society. Webb met Sidney in the 90s, a career civil servant with radical political opinion in socialism. With Sidney, she became part of an organized group of British thinkers, the Fabian Socialists, for which she played a crucial role in its creation in 1884. It is both a think tank and an English centre-left political club. With a socialist and reformist orientation, it was involved in the creation of the Labour Party in 19. Her husband was a minister in the Labour government after the World War II. The Fabian Society ideas converged towards a consensus of the pragmatic socialism. That means that, on contrary to Marx's point of view, the rents that Marx called superior value should be turned over to local governments understood as the democratically elected representatives of the community. While Marx is opposed to the idea of the state hierarchy. They thought that the socialism will come about not through revolution, but through the gradual evolution of public opinion working through the democratic process. In the public mind, the Fabianism would become associated with a fair and thoughtful presentation of issues, a mixture of planning socialism and parliamentary democracy. With Fabian support, Beatrice Potter co-authored the books and pamphlets on socialism and the cooperative movement, including The History of Trade Unionism and Industrial Democracy. Following their visit to Russia in 1932, they wrote the long and highly controversial study of the Soviet system, Soviet Communism, A New Civilization, published in 1935. This book marks a break with the path of action and research of the couple placed under the sin of reforming Fabianism. Indeed, the Webbs were very hostile to the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. In this massive book, Sidney and Beatrice Potter Webb share their feeling about their trip in the USS. Overall, Sidney and Beatrice Potter Webb praise the Communism Party of the USS. The authors of Soviet communism were indeed trying to show that the regime in force in the USS is a democracy, not a dictatorship. Obviously, historians have criticized the Webbs for promoting an uncritical view of Stalin's conduct. And to finish, we can wonder if Beatrice Potter Webb was an anti-feminist. She had acquired a modest reputation from journal publication on working-class conditions, and she was perceived as a social specialist in issues of women's work until the moment where she signed an anti-suffrage petition, which discredited her to most people as an investigator into women's issues. But later Webb stated that she regretted signing the Appel against female suffrage and wrote a letter to Millicent Fawcett in 1906, in which she spoke out in favor of women's suffrage. But she wanted to be seen as a woman brain worker. She refused to allow her gender to be a sign of her identity. However, she published in 1926 the book Wages of Men and Women Should They Be Equal, in which she asked for equal pay for equal work. But it is not a purely feminist work because she is more concerned with the situation of the women working class than women in general. So the women's issues are incorporated in her sociological analysis of the working world, but does not base her work only around this question. She does not analyze how class oppression are linked to patriarchal society. For her, the woman's problem will be solved once those of the working class are solved. She refused to admit that the situation of women influences their career. Now, I would like to show strong similarities between Beatrice Potter Webb and one of the greatest pioneers of social work in the US, Jane Addams. Beatrice Potter Webb was not only a pioneer in the sociological discipline, but also an important social reformer. It is entirely legitimate to ask whether Beatrice Potter Webb was not the Jane Addams of the UK. With a few of differences, of course. While Beatrice Potter Webb contributed to the welfare state and was a figure of progressivism, Jane Addams was at the origin of important social reforms in the USA. For example, for the worker rights, the factory inspection, justice for immigrants and African Americans. And Beatrice Potter Webb was the founder of social policies by writing one of the reports that introduced the welfare state. Both were fervent socialists strongly influenced by the wave of socialism that emerged at the end of the 19th century and were both anti-individualists. Both chose to do social investigation in the field. While Beatrice Potter Webb investigated in the slums of London, Jane Addams set up the Hull House in the underprivileged area in Chicago.
Hi everyone, my name is Wojciech and I would like to introduce you to Karl Mannheim. Karl Mannheim was an influential Hungarian sociologist during the first half of the 20th century. Now I will go briefly through biography of Karl Mannheim. He was key figure in classical sociology. But what exactly is classical sociology? The basic premise of all classical sociological theories is that the contemporary world is the outcome of a transition from traditional to modern societies. Secondly, he was one of the founders of the sociology of knowledge, but more about that later. Ideology and Utopia. Mannheim is best known for this book. And regarding his studies, he studied philosophy and literature at the University of Budapest. He obtained there a PhD, though he also went to Berlin and Paris to further his education. In Ideology and Utopia, he argued that the application of the term ideology should be expanded. He traced the history of the term from what he called a particular view. This view saw ideology as the perhaps deliberate obscuring of facts. This view gave way to a total conception, most notably in Marx, which argued that a whole social group's thought was formed by its social position. For example, the proletariat's beliefs were conditioned by their relationship to the means of production. However, he called for a further step, which uh, he called a general total conception of ideology, in which it was recognized that everyone's beliefs, including the social scientists, were a product of the context they were created in. So to Mannheim, ideas were products of their times and of the social statuses of their proponents. Mannheim points out social class, location, and generation as the greatest determinants of knowledge. Karl Mannheim, in his famous work "Ideology and Utopia", rejects Marx's theory of ideology on three grounds: style of thought of any group is only indirectly related to its interests; there is no direct correlation between its consciousness and its economic interests. All thought is shaped by its social background, so Marxism itself is the ideology of a class, and apart from classes, other social groups, like different generations, also have a significant influence upon consciousness. Mannheim considered that ideological knowledge is often placed within the given social structure and historical process, so such knowledge, including social scientists, is situationally relative. The social structure to which ideas are bound are seen mainly in terms of class factors or status groups. The goal isn't to identify the ultimate truth of something, but instead to figure out in practice how people frame, perceive, and interpret the world out there. Mannheim distinguishes between two sorts of ideology: particular ideologies. These are local representations of things in the world that might be colored by specific interests or points of view. This view saw ideology as the perhaps deliberate obscuring of facts. Total ideologies. A total ideology is a global and unitary conception of life and of history, which postulates the social essence of man and subordinates the individual to the collective. A whole social group's thought was formed by its social position. Marxist view. Mannheim further contrasts ideology with utopia. Ideology represents the tendency of conversation relying on false consciousness to master support for the maintenance of status quo. On the other hand, for Mannheim, a state of mind is utopian when it is inappropriate with the immediate situation and when transferred to actions tend to disrupt the order of things. The sociology of knowledge is the study of the relationship between The sociology of knowledge is the study of the relationship between human thought and the social context within which it arises, and the effects that prevailing ideas have on societies. It deals with broad fundamental questions about the extent and limits of social influences on individuals' lives and the social cultural basis of our knowledge about the world. Complementary to the sociology of knowledge is the role of ignorance and its relationship to knowledge, including the study of unawareness, ignorance, knowledge gaps, or non-knowledge as inherent features of knowledge making. The sociology of knowledge was pioneered primarily by the sociologist Emily Durkheim at the beginning of the 20th century. Karl Mannheim gave impetus to the growth of the sociology of knowledge with his book Ideology and Utopia. Mannheim focuses largely on the role that ideology plays in our representations of the workings of the social world within which we live. There is a connection between knowledge and interests. Beliefs like fixed rent land tenure is an efficient system for producing agricultural innovation have specific and different consequences for various actors in society: landlords, peasant proprietors, and tenant farmers. So what appears to be a factual statement about incentives and farming turns out to have different effects on various actors' interests. This is where Marx's ideas of ideology and false consciousness come in. Various classes have an interest in favoring or disfavoring certain ways of looking at the world. Marx might put the point along these lines. One's position within the system of property and technology introduces a bias into one's beliefs about how the world works. So let's look at Mannheim's theory. Mannheim opens his book with these words in the expanded English edition of 1936. This book is concerned with the problem of how men actually think. The aim of these studies is to investigate not how thinking appears in textbooks on logic, but how it actually functions in public life and in politics as an instrument of collective action. The principal thesis of the sociology of knowledge is that there are modes of thought which cannot be adequately understood as long as their social origins are unclear. The sociology of knowledge seeks to understand thought in the concrete setting of an historical social situation, out of which individually differentiated thought only where gradually emerges. Strictly speaking, it is incorrect to say that the single individual thinks. He finds himself in an inherited situation of thought, which are appropriate to this situation, and attempts to elaborate further the inherited modes of response or to substitute others for them in order to deal more adequately with the new challenges which have arisen out of the shifts and changes in this situation. Many of these statements can be understood in terms of the general problem of beliefs about reality that human beings face in the world. We have perceptions and needs, and we are forced to arrive at concepts and explanatory ideas through which we can organize our perception and pursue our needs. Knowledge frameworks do not come to human beings full blown. Instead, it is a major historical and cultural task to create such frameworks. And this is just as true for the problem of knowing how social relationships work as it is for understanding the workings of the natural world. The conceptual frameworks and explanatory hypotheses that we form are contingent and historical products, and they have a social history. His reasoning seems to have many similarities to that of Weber, and the question he's ultimately interested in is the ways in which human knowledge and belief are themselves contingent, conditioned, creative activities.
Thank you for attention. Bye.